No. Too short. All right, we ain't gonna bother. I don't even have anything for it anyways. So you're here for the Dungeon Master Workshop. You can sit down at the table there if you want to take any notes. Or I'm live streaming it the whole time, so if you need to leave or anything, you've got that. Hey, Steven.
How's it going?
Good. Are you here for the Dungeon Master Workshop?
No, I'm here to play some Casual Command.
Heck yeah. We've got that. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Figure I should also at some point when you're done, doing all your other stuff, perhaps on Friday.
Yes. I've got stuff to talk about, so super exciting.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the things I wanted to talk about for the class is play styles, specifically player styles. What are players interested in D&D, and how to engage different play styles. Just super quick about me. I've been playing role-playing games for close to about 15 years, and I did it for 4 years professionally, where I charged for this service. So the different topics I'm going to talk about, we're going to talk about styles of play. As in, when people play RPGs, what are they looking for? What engages them? Styles of play. We'll then talk about what is your style of play as a dungeon master or a game master? What do you find value in? And then how do we engage players, and how do we bridge the gap between what we like, what excites us, and what excites our players? And then we can get into some really meta stuff about players, how to resolve conflict, how to resolve players who have the main character syndrome. We can talk about troubleshooting players and styles of play. And then, of course, if people have questions, we can open it up there. Hey, welcome. So styles of play. There are a lot of different ways people engage with RPGs. And in fact, with role-playing games, not just Dungeons and Dragons, there's a lot of different ways people can have fun with RPGs. So for example, very classic way to have fun with RPGs is somebody who enjoys combat mechanics, fighting, the challenge of overcoming a threat, and expressing yourself through combat mechanics. So that is a style of play. That is what engages some people. Sometimes called war gamers. These are people who maybe they played other tactical games, maybe video games, or maybe miniature-based war games like Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, that kind of stuff. So you've got war gamers who specifically like combat, the mechanics of it. You also have role players. Okay, and this is a very new kind of category of people. People who just like to inhabit the body of a character, like to act. Sometimes, a lot of the time, it comes with a silly voice. This is because I would say this is definitely a Critical Role effect has introduced a lot of new players into the RPG space, and the streamed RPGs really do focus on characters. So being in character, having a voice, telling a story with your character, we'll get to storytelling in just a bit, but just being able to role play as a character is kind of while role-playing games have had a long time, and that has always been, we haven't really seen this kind of player in the amount of force it is. There's a lot of people who are going to just have so much fun just sitting around and shopping while in character, and that's what they find fun. Then you have the storytellers, people who engage with your lore, or they like to write a 5-page character background. They want to know more about the world, or they are prospective dungeon masters themselves. People who enjoy writing short stories, even long-form stories. They like the idea of telling a story narratively through the means of RPGs to express themselves. Welcome in. And then we're doing a Dungeon Master class if you're interested over here. And then lastly, you have the kind of players who just want to be with their friends. They don't really care that they're playing D&D. They just want to be with friends and have a good time. They will also just have as much fun playing Settlers of Catan or Magic the Gathering. Their friends are all just interested in playing D&D, so they want to spend time with their friends, so they're going to play D&D because that's what their friends are doing. They're not really interested in the actual game itself. They're just interested in socializing and being with their friends. So now that we kind of understand these styles, oh, and I should say, players aren't specifically in just one boot camp. Depending on your mood, depending on what you're going through, you can definitely be in multiples of those styles, and it can even shift as you're playing. Maybe you are really shy, and so you don't really like role-playing at all until it clicks with the right group, and then suddenly you have so much fun role-playing, it's now the thing you want to do the most. Or maybe you just started as someone who just wanted to play with their friends, but now you've realized how fun RPGs are, and now you're invested in the storytelling. So people can definitely be in different styles, and even their moods will dictate their styles. If they had a bad day, maybe they just want to hang out with friends, or maybe they've been looking forward to the story and fighting the villain for the past month, and they don't want to do any role play at all, they just want to get to the combat. So now that we've kind of identified the styles, we need to ask ourselves as a dungeon master, what style do I appreciate? And this is what I feel like causes a lot of burnout for dungeon masters. Dungeon masters get really tired of prepping games that they don't like the style for themselves, okay? If I am a very I love combat, I love tactics, I love to challenge my players, I like to brainstorm what kind of monsters, what kind of traps I want to set for my players, and all my players are doing is role-play shopping with each other, I'm going to get very frustrated as a dungeon master because I have to create shopping mechanics and NPCs for shops, and I will get burnt out because that's not what excites me about D&D. What excites me is creating maps and creating stat blocks for monsters. So I, as the dungeon master, I need to find out what excites me about being a dungeon master. What of these styles sounds interesting to me? And once I kind of know what I like about, I think that really, helps prevent dungeon master burnout. And also, it allows us to figure out what kind of players or how I can diversify what I like into the other styles without hurting myself or without hurting my game. So let's say me, for example, I love the challenge of combat. I like to create unique monsters. The idea of creating an interesting combat map for my players to dig their teeth into and challenge my players sounds really interesting for me. So when I prep, that's one of the first things I want to prep. I'm really excited to prep that. One of the things I can do as a dungeon master to kind of help my prep and help kind of grease the gears of prep is to know, okay, if I really want to play in the boss fight, let me finish the tedious stuff first. Let me finish the village and the NPCs as quick as I can, so then I can get to the good stuff, but I still need to plan out the other stuff before I plan the stuff that I really like. So that's one thing I do for myself. I know what I like to prep, so I'll prep the stuff I don't like first and kind of use it as like a carrot on a stick to motivate myself to plan the other stuff that I want to. Now let's talk about engaging players with the different play styles and how do you pull them into the play styles you like. First off, you can reward their play styles. If the players love role-playing and they love using their voices and talking in character, give them chances to do that. One of the easy things to do is while they're sitting around a campfire, you can hand a player a question about, hey, tell a story about your backstory, or you can give a prompt to a player to kind of light the spark of role play. And this is also really good for if you have a player who doesn't like to role play. If you have a player who doesn't like to role play, but you want them to engage with role playing aspects, a great way to do that is to give the player fair warning. Hey, before we start playing today, I want you to think about a story, a backstory for your character so you can share it at a moment. Or before we play today, I want your character to give an inspirational speech. And I'm not going to tell you specifically when, but there'll be a moment for your character to give an inspirational speech. So giving a fair warning before a session allows players who are nervous in role-playing to think about what they want to say beforehand. It helps them break the ice, helps them focus, and then they'll have an awesome moment. You let them give their motivational speech, or you let them talk about their backstory, and they'll do it in character, and they'll be prepared, and that will help kind of break the ice and get them into, oh, okay, I was ready for this, and it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was. It was actually pretty easy to do. So if you've got a player who's not engaging with role play, fair warning is a fantastic way to get them to engage with it. In fact, fair warning is a fantastic way to get anybody into something that they don't like or is challenging for them to do. So if you have a player who doesn't really like combat, or a new player who's like, I'm really nervous about combat, I don't know what I'm doing. Again, give them fair warning. Hey, during the combat, you're going up against something, and I want you to think about how you want to use these spells, or think about what character you want to shift into before. Or even hold their hand and be like, hey, during combat, you should change into an owl bear. Sometime in the next session we play, you'll have the perfect chance to change into an owl bear, and that will kind of that will get them thinking already before the even combat starts. Oh, I know what to do because my dungeon master gave me kind of a warning. Great for new players or players who have trouble engaging with the different styles. So that's a great way to engage with styles. Another way to engage with style is to try to keep the moments they don't like as short as possible. So combat, for example, one of the reasons a lot of people don't like combat is because it's long, it's grindy, and it feels like it takes forever. And if I do combat for 3 hours and I only get a role play for a half hour, well, 3 hours of the game I'm bored, and a half hour, I finally get to do what I like. Or other players are taking too much time at the table. I think one of our jobs as a dungeon master is we're a steward of fun, and so we need to try to, we want to make fun as accessible as possible. So ways we can get our players or ways we can speed up combat is stuff like initiative order. Hey, player 1, it's your turn. Player 2, start thinking about what you're doing. So when it's your turn, get ready. You can, in every battle, there's always a turning point, a point where, all right, the enemy wizard is dead, and now we just have a bunch of minions, or the main chief, or the goblin chief is dead, and now we just got some wounded goblins around. I always get to the turning point in the battle where the players, okay, problem is solved, now we just got to clean up all these guys. I usually just have them narrate how they're going to finish off their enemies. I don't have them actually go and kill every single enemy on the map. I say, okay, obviously you guys are going to win in the next turn or two, so tell me how you're going to finish off these enemies. And they could say, oh, well, I'll block the door so the enemies can't escape and set off an alarm, or I'll capture them and maybe we can offer peace. I don't even usually have them roll for it because the challenge has already been met and done. The hard part's over, so let's just get to the good part. Let's narrate the conclusion so we can move the game on. There's a lot of ways you yourself as a dungeon master can train and onboard your players to make combat faster. You can train your players, hey, when you roll your attack roll with your d20, roll your damage dice at the same time. Hey, your turns, I'm only going to allow turns to be a minute long. So every time it's your turn, after 30 seconds, I'm going to flip over this timer and you have 30 more seconds and then it's got to go. You can work with your players, and you can even give them incentives. Hey, if you can get your turn done in 15 seconds, then your next attack you'll get inspiration or something like that. There's even better systems for combat. If you really like combat, but your players don't, think about maybe changing to a system that's easier for them to understand, or maybe take out magic entirely and instead give them 1 or 2 or 3 abilities that give you the magic feel, but then they don't have to worry about spell slots and that kind of stuff. Again, our job as Dungeon Masters is to facilitate fun, and if what's not fun is managing a bunch of spells and spell slots and reading spell mechanics, try to make that as easy as possible for your players. All right. So that's engaging with styles we don't like. Okay. Again, we talked about fair warning. Great way to give players time to get ready for something they don't like or they don't really engage with. We talked about streamlining combat. The last thing we can do is we can, Matt Colville says, chase your players up a tree and then light it on fire. So let's say your players aren't engaging in the world or in your story. Players are spending too long role-play shopping or exploring. They aren't really, you feel like after a 4-hour session, nothing was really accomplished. What you can do is you can have an enemy, either from a leader minion or something, break down the door and boom, start rolling dice. The minions are attacking you now, in the middle of the shop, in the middle of the square. So if you as a Dungeon Master are having problems getting your players to follow the story or follow what's important, kick down the door and orcs attack, or chase them up a tree and light them on fire. When you purposefully just force your players in a spot where they have to have combat, they suddenly now have to think and react, and they can't just be dilly-dallying and taking their time and doing whatever you want. And again, this is based on your style. If you really want to tell an epic story, have really cool cinematic moments for your players, and your players are just talking to the shopkeep, this is one way. While they're shopping, the orcs throw a torch into the room, the store starts to catch on fire, and the orcs have now attacked the town square. Why did they attack? Well, you're going to have to figure that out, but you can figure that out the session after and finish off combat. All right, I'm going to pause real quick, and I'm going to check comments here to see if we have any questions. And also, thank you for joining me. What was your name? Nice to meet you. Do you have any questions on styles of play? Is there anything you want me to dig deeper into? Otherwise, we'll go to specific player problems that I've learned and I've seen. Doing good. Okay. I've only seen a few comments online, and the comments are just wishing good. So we're good there. All right. So we've got our play styles. We know as a Dungeon Master what we like, what excites us. Maybe the story, maybe challenging combat, maybe some role play. We now know our players will engage with different things. And so we want to engage players on those different tracks or those different styles. So we'll give them a little bit of time to shop, or we'll give them a cool combat, or we'll give them an interesting story moment. But we don't want it to be all role-playing or all combat, unless that's what everyone signed up for. If you have the right group and the whole group is just like, all we want to do is dungeon crawl, then fantastic. Just do the grindiest dungeon crawl ever. But variety is definitely the spice of RPGs, being able to move to different parts of the game, to meet different NPCs, to discover new locations, new magic items, that the newness, the variety of RPGs is a really big advantage to these kind of games. I definitely am tired of playing Settlers of Catan, because I played Settlers of Catan for a lot of my life, and I kind of know the strategies and what I do, but with an RPG and with different characters, it always seems fresh. Especially with the right dungeon master, I never feel like I'm retreading the same ground. So lean into that. Try to create interesting scenarios. Let's talk about specific player problems or things that can become problems and how to mitigate that kind of stuff. So one of the problems people have, especially with new players, is main character syndrome. This is where a player is really excited about their character, and they seem to take a lot of the attention. Oh, hey, we're going to go here. They sometimes fall into the role of a leader, and it's nice to have a leader at the group. But the threat of a main character at the table means other players who are more quiet, more reserved, will have less chances to play. These players will possibly be quiet for the entire session, and then you'll realize after a 3-hour game, they probably only rolled the dice 3 or 4 times, and I only actually talked to them maybe once or twice. And instead, because this character's asking, or this player's asking all the questions, and they want to role play, or they're telling people how to fight, all my time and attention is going on this player when it needs to be dispersed to other people. Best way to mitigate this is realize when it's happening, okay, and then pivoting your attention to the other players. So player 1, yes, you can absolutely investigate the room, but before you do, I want to ask our wizard if they have any thoughts about the weird symbols on the wall. Okay, so you can manually point the spotlight to other people, especially with context clues like that. So let's say there's a murder in a room, there's weird symbols on the wall, and player 1, who's been kind of leading the whole investigation, is like, well, I want to check the body for wounds. You can say, all right, player 1, roll your dice. Oh, our wizard player, the runes on the wall seem like magical runes. Do you want to give me an arcane check? Player 1, I'll get to what you find in just a bit. As a Dungeon Master, we can easily start engaging our players that way by asking them questions. What do you think your character would do? Or do you want to do something? And that can help kind of break them out of the ice that they put them in themselves. If we have a player who's really not engaging, this is shy people, socially shy. These are people who haven't played role-playing games that much. They feel out of their element. They feel embarrassed. There's a few other things we can do. If we're shy about role-playing, if we're nervous about playing a game, especially having a voice, I, as a Dungeon Master, I can be the cheerleader for role-play. I can talk to that player in funny voices. I can show that, hey, it's okay to role-play. We're all just friends here. So if I ham it up, that's a great way to engage, or at least let a player know this is a safe space for roleplay. And we talked about the fair warning. That's another great way to really help somebody who's super tentative. Give them a fair warning the session before. Say, hey, Boblin the Goblin is going to want to talk to you sometime. So think about what you want to tell Bobbin the Goblin if you like him, or if you're sad about killing his tribe or something like that. So main character syndrome, quiet player. Those are two. It's almost the same problem in reverse. Main character syndrome, super excited about their character, want to do everything. They kind of demand a lot of attention. And then super quiet, reserved player is either they're shy, or they're unsure about how to play, or they're just not engaging with the game or the mechanics, asking them questions. As a Dungeon Master, I think it's really important to read body language. In fact, when I interview professional Dungeon Masters to see if they would be a good fit for our store, I ask them how they are in reading body language. Can you tell when a player is not engaged in the game? You know, if they're on their phone scrolling, if they're just sitting there stacking dice, if they have to ask a few times, wait, what just happened? These are common signs that a person is not engaged at all in the game. Once I can identify somebody's not engaged, then I can pull whatever strings I need to behind my DM screen to engage those players. Hey, Wizard, I want you to roll an Arcana roll. Why? Well, you'll find out. Roll it for me. I rolled a 7. Oh, well, you don't notice anything. What does that mean? You know, now you've asked a question, and now you've hooked that player, and they're like, what do you mean that? What do you mean that? Was there something to notice? And now they're going to perk up, and they're going to start playing. Hey, Rogue, give me an insight check. Or not an insight, perception check. All right, cool. I rolled 25. Okay. You hear some strange noises, and these are the noises you heard when your parents were killed. Wait, what? You know, again, like you can. We have a lot of tools as dungeon masters, asking for rolls, asking for input to re-engage players who are just on their phones or they're very quiet. All right, so those are two common problems I see at tables. Another problem I have is players who use it's what my character would do defense. Toxic players is another term for this. Players who actively go against the party and they're using some weak defense, like it's what my character would do, or I'm playing a chaotic neutral character, that kind of stuff. These players are really tough to play with. If you identify one of these at your table, it can bring down the whole mood of the entire table. My advice for this is to pull the player aside after a session and talk to them personally, engage their interest in the game. Why are they playing the game? And do they know that they are being disruptive to the other players? So, we have rules in our tavern, and we go by these rules because we have customers playing games in our tavern. And so if I have a player who's doing this, that ruins the experience for my other customers. So again, this is something I train my dungeon masters, and I'm very strict about it. So we pull the player aside and we say, hey, I want to clear the air. Why are you going ahead of the party before everyone else, when everyone else said we should stick together? Or why are you looting bodies in the middle of combat when the cleric is down? Oh, well, I just want to get loot, and I feel like it's unfair. Everybody else got cool loot last time, and I didn't get any loot. Okay, well, we can address that problem. If you feel like you need better loot, that's something I, as a dungeon master, can give you. But I want you to realize, as a player, that's actually really harmful to the other people at the table. Do you understand why that's harmful? Because now their characters are unconscious, or it feels like you're stealing from them, or you're taking advantage of situations, and their characters are not going to get the same benefits that you do. Do you understand that, like, it's causing friction at the table? If they are aware enough, if they are the person who can step back and be like, hey, you know what? All right, yeah, I probably played that wrong. Or, hey, I didn't realize at all. This is my first time playing. But now that you bring it up to me, now I understand how that could be bad. I can work towards being I can work with the other players, or share the loot, or not go lone wolf. If they're aware enough themselves to be able to see what they did was wrong, all right, there's a chance that was just a one-off thing or a simple mistake, and we can move forward and we can play with them. If they kind of give you excuses, or if they're like not really admitting that what they did is wrong, or if they say, yeah, I'm sorry, and then they turn around and do it again, this is a player who I would honestly not be a dungeon master for. And that's your choice as a dungeon master. That's kind of a hard pill to swallow. Being a dungeon master doesn't mean you need to deal with players that are not fun to play with. For your mental health, for your other players' mental health, that's not your job to be a life coach on somebody how to be nice and how to get along with other people. So this is a conversation we've had both with customers in the store, and I've had to have personally with people who I considered friends. I had to go up and say, hey, you know what? I enjoy playing games with you, but I don't enjoy playing D&D with you. So let's play something else. I'm fine with playing Magic with you. It's super fun to play Magic with you. We can play Magic, but I'm not going to play D&D with you. And you can be specific or you can be vague. It's not really, if you, the Dungeon Master, don't want to play with a player, or if somebody at your player, some players causing problems and you see it's hurting other players, then just tell them, hey, we don't want to play D&D with you, okay? And that's it. That's all you owe them. Hey, we don't want to play D&D with you. That's really all you need to say. So that's how to deal with toxic players. Sometimes they'll fix themselves. Sometimes it was just, I didn't know that was bad behavior. I didn't know that was not kosher. Other times, people can just be very selfish with RPGs. RPGs kind of give people a doorway into expressing themselves in unhealthy ways because it's a fantasy world, and so they feel that I can do whatever I want in a fantasy world, unmitigated by consequence and moral decisions. And there probably is a good table for them. There's probably a table just full of toxic players as well that they can get along with, and they can stab each other in the back, and they can have a toxic dungeon master who one-shots them because it's no fair. There's probably a group out there for them. But every group will have its own dynamic, and if somebody's really going against that dynamic, for the sake of your health and the other people's health, it's better to take that player out. And it's not your prerogative to carry a burden for yourself. So that's toxic players. Do you have to deal with much of this at the shop? Hey, Dungeon Studios, good to see you. We do have to deal with this every now and then. I will say, one huge benefit of having paid games is, thank you, Bernardo. RPG can be therapeutic, but it is not therapy. Absolutely, I completely agree. One of the great benefits of having charged games where people pay and having professional trained dungeon masters is it actually raises the quality of players a lot. And in fact, if you are a dungeon master and you enjoy being a dungeon master, I highly encourage getting yourself into a space that you could possibly charge even $5 for your games. And because it is a part-time job if you want to be a dungeon master. It takes a lot of work and a lot of knowledge. But if you charge for you to run a game, what that tells people is, hey, I'm serious enough to play this game that I will pay attention. If I'm going to put $5 down to play a game, that's 5 of my hard-earned dollars. So I'm way more likely to engage with it because I paid for that money. It's like going to a movie theater, paying for a ticket, versus scrolling on Netflix and just putting something on while you're working. Since I paid, since I showed up, my level of engagement is going to be a lot more. And that does also help us get rid of toxic players. Not all of them, but if I'm a toxic player and my idea of fun is just trolling other people, I'm not going to pay money to troll other people. Usually, that does happen. But yeah, RPG can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy. Dungeon masters can be great people, but they are absolutely not your therapist. I love that. All right, so toxic players, unengaged players, main character syndrome. Those are different things we've seen from people. Okay? We have other types of players. You have someone like a rules lawyer. A lot of dungeon masters have complained about rules lawyers. Me personally, I have always loved having rules lawyers at my table because I myself can't memorize all the rules. And so when a player says, oh, by the way, the spell should do this, then that helps me as a dungeon master learn. Now, what a lot of dungeon masters do not like is meta gamers. Meta gamers are players who try to use either outside game knowledge or mechanical knowledge to try to change how you're doing things, to disrupt your game. So a great example of a meta gamer is someone who can, when you say, oh, the floors in the dungeon look really clean, the player then says, oh, there must be oozes in the dungeon, even though their character might have never encountered oozes, and now they're really hyper vigilant. Oh, we need to have bludgeoning weapons and burning attacks because we're going to be fighting oozes. And someone who takes their character and they've min-maxed their character and they've made their character really good at a lot of stuff. So I, as the dungeon master, have to work really hard to create interesting encounters because I have a player who's super powerful and the rest of my players are just normal powerful. So then I have a really tough time challenging him and also not wiping out the rest of my players. Meta gamers are tough to deal with. So a few ways to deal with meta gamers. Okay? And to an extent, rules lawyers. Okay? If you personally don't like to be interrupted for the player saying, actually, I think the spell works this way, or actually, this happens, pull that player aside and say, hey, I, as the dungeon master, don't really like it when during a game you interrupt me in the middle of combat because it really slows down combat. Or, hey, I don't like being corrected in front of the other players because it makes me as a dungeon master less credible. Or, hey, I don't like it when, since you've been playing D&D for 5 years and we have a new player at the table, I don't like it when you start telling the players the monster's weaknesses because I want that player to have the experience of figuring out how to battle an ooze. And you're kind of taking that away from them. Pulling that person aside and just being honest on how it's making you feel as a dungeon master should allow the player to see it from your perspective and what they're doing is disruptive. Okay? Then you can offer a mitigation. Hey, if I get a spell wrong or rule wrong, can you text it to me? Can you write it down for me? So by the end of the combat encounter, I can get all the notes on everything I got wrong. And then you can give that to me afterwards, and then I can improve as a dungeon master. Okay? That is one way. Or hey, maybe what we can do is we can give your character, maybe we create your character as a mentor, and let's make your character kind of more of a wizened old monster hunter. So it makes sense canonically why you have knowledge of all of these monsters that we're hunting. There are ways you could work with your players, try to find a neutral ground. But again, we're kind of going back to the toxic player. If you ask something of your player, specifically that's frustrating you, and they continue to do it, again, there might be a better table for them. And that's nothing against you, and that's nothing against them. Just some games and some play styles just don't work well with other people, and that's fine. You know, if this player really values high-level rule knowledge, they want to know that every spell is being used correctly and every measurement is being made and every mechanic is being followed. If that's something they really value, and you as the dungeon master, you don't value that much, nearly as much as immersion and experience, there's definitely a big mismatch there. So either you try to figure out, hey, what's the common ground we can work on? Or, hey, we need to find a different game to play. Maybe I play Magic with you or something. Because we have that mismatch. Nothing wrong with that. One thing that really helps with all of this is one-shots. One-shots is a fantastic way to play an RPG, and you won't have to deal with a lot of these problems for long. You only have to deal with these problems for a few hours. And then you could be like, all right, that player was kind of toxic. And then maybe you play another one-shot with them, a different kind of experience. And then you're like, dang, that player was still toxic, even with this different character. Boom, you've just learned right there that that's somebody you probably won't get along with. And you didn't have to put all the work of a campaign to get this established, because that really sucks when you work so hard on a campaign and you get these players and you're super excited, and then you get 4 sessions in and then you're like, wow, that was kind of a waste of time because 2 of the players I'm not really interested in playing with at all. They rub me the wrong way. Any questions? Any final thoughts? Anything you want me to touch on? No worries, no worries. I will talk a bit more. Thank you.
This has been awesome. Thank you.
I appreciate it. We want to do these Dungeon Master workshops twice a month. And in March, we're working on a very special Dungeon Master workshop about writing and publishing adventures. On how do you take your own world, how do you take your own adventure, how do you write it, how do you lay it out, how do you edit it, how do you publish it, how do you market it. I almost want to do a whole month of like being a professional writer / dungeon master. What does that look like? So March, but we'll do 2 more classes in February, so thank you. Prepping, okay, so prepping secrets for dungeon masters. That would be a good topic. I enjoy doing one-shots with players that I will be hosting a long campaign just to see how they get along with each other. Fatal Studios, that's fantastic advice. Best way to test players is to just run one-shots. Or even a mini campaign, you know? Do a 2-episode campaign. In fact, that's a great way to engage players, is say, hey, we're just gonna meet these 2 Saturdays back to back, and you can tell a really epic story in 8 hours together. You know, a bit railroady, but beginning to end, those players are gonna have a blast, and you only have to prep just 8 hours worth of content. And that's a great way to see how the players will interact with each other. And what happens is when you run one-shots and they are successful, they are fun, it gives your players a really satisfactory ending, and they're like, dang, that was so fun, I want to do it again. It's a fantastic way to engage with people, so I highly recommend one-shots. MCDM, Matt Colville, did a whole like 50-minute episode on how long should D&D be. So that's a really good thing. Prepping the secrets for Dungeon Masters. Let me touch on this. Bernardo. I hope I got that name right. So prepping secrets for Dungeon Masters. There is a lot to prep, especially if you're going to try to, I want to homebrew, I have an epic adventure I want to run. It can be overwhelming what you need to homebrew or what you need to prep. Or even if you're doing a pre-written module, it seems like a lot. I can usually prep half of the time that I'm going to be gaming. So thank you, I got your name right, good. So if I plan on playing a 4-hour session with some friends or a 4-hour one-shot, I usually need about 2 hours to prep that. I'll need more if it's a homebrew adventure. I'll need a little bit less if it's a pre-written adventure, but about half the time is what I usually need to prep. Now, I've been doing this for a while. I'm experienced. I think if it's your first time ever, I think it'll take you about the same time to prep a session as you will to run it. If you're going to run a 4-hour game, it's going to take you a lot to figure out how do the monster mechanics work, do I need to draw out a map, that kind of stuff. The more you prep, the more the faster you get at it. It's a muscle. A Dungeon Master prep is definitely a muscle. Now, I will say, I'll give you a few tips on how to improve your prep time and get the most bang for your buck. Okay? First off, I think of prep as video game rendering, okay? So if you ever played a game like Dark Souls or any video game, you see a castle off in the distance. That castle is just a picture, just a JPEG, just a picture on a flat plane, and it's a low pixel picture. So if in a world, if my players are in a town, okay, and I know there's the capital that's 5 days away, that's all I'm going to worry about is prepping the name of the capital, okay? Again, just a JPEG of a castle far away. If you then approach the castle, okay, the castle will turn in from a picture to like a very chunky 3D thing with some very rough textures. Again, so it has more definition. It gets a bit more clearer. However, it's still only partially rendered. So now let's say my players want to visit the capital. All right, well, for the capital, I guess I need to figure out who is the ruling party. Okay, there's going to be a king. What's his name? I don't need to figure that out yet. There's a king, and the king has guards. And in the kingdom, there's the interesting thing about the kingdom, it has two economic classes. You have a really rich part of town, and then you have the slums, the really poor part of town. Cool. Then when your players, or in the video game, when you get into when you get to the castle, once you actually walk up to the castle is finally like rendered out. All right, now all the textures, or now everything has polygons and is high textured resolution, and you as the player can like hit the walls of the castle and there's enemies in there. So the idea is, all right, well now if your players want to engage with the guards and they want to know the guards' family and they want to know where the near inn is, that kind of stuff. Now I have to start rendering things out inside that, okay? And that's a fantastic place to kind of leave your players off. So your players are in this little town and they say, hey, we want to go to the capital. All right, we're going to make the rest of the session about traveling to the capital. And then we're going to stop right when they get to the city gates. So then next session I can then prep the rough outline of the capital. Here are the main factors of the capital. I'm going to get some guard NPCs. I'm going to get the king's name. And I'm going to get whatever plot hook that I want the players to engage with. I'm going to figure that out. But I don't even need a whole map of the kingdom yet. I don't even need to know secret hideouts or where the Thieves Guild is yet, until the players start asking about that kind of stuff. All right, well, they go to the tavern and they want to know about the Thieves Guild. Okay, well, I can buy myself some time. Let's say it takes them 3 taverns to find somebody, and then then suddenly they have to chase them through the streets. And then at the end of the session, they finally track down the entrance of the Thieves Guild. Great, now I can really flesh out the Thieves Guild, the whole underground system. I can create my code. I can create all my NPCs for that. So I like to, when I'm prepping, I like to have just a big overall picture, kind of just the JPEG of the castle, want to know my general story beats, and then wherever my players are immediately is the place I'm going to focus my attention on prepping. So in this campaign, I know the bad guys I want them to fight are the goblins, and I want them to go in the cave to find a missing note. Okay, so I need to flesh out the entire cave. I need to flesh out the goblins. I need to make sure they have stat blocks. I need to know everything about that cave because that's where they're going to visit. But I don't need to know anything else besides that. Or I just need to know the very, very rough essentials of the rest. Now the problem you run into is, what if your players switch tracks super fast and they want to go down into something else entirely? And we see even fantastic dungeon masters like Matt Mercer. Liam O'Brien loves to do this to Matt Mercer. He'll be like, hey, in the city, is there a bookshop? And then Matt Mercer has to be like, yeah, of course, there's the the bookshop of, and then Matt Mercer has to literally pull it out of thin air, the Endless Pages bookshop. Okay, I want to go inside the Endless Pages bookshop. There's a kind old lady with scrawny glasses. Okay, ask the kind old lady where her smut books are. The old lady shames you, but then she points to like a dusty shelf. Okay, I'm gonna go over to the dusty shelf and I'm gonna pick up the first book I see. That sucks when your players are going to like drive down a completely different path than what you expected. But in all honesty, there's no way you could have ever prepped for anything like that. And that really just now comes down to your skills of improv, your skills of being able to just create out of nothing. And there isn't really anything you can do to prep. Even if you spend hundreds of hours on your world, there's no way you could have predicted your player was going to try to hunt down a bookshop to look for medieval smut. So don't kill yourself as a dungeon master trying to prep every single solution, because it's impossible. You'll never know what your players are going to ask for. Brendan Lee Mulligan talks about how he prepared an entire campaign, and the entire campaign, the first thing it hinged on was the princess getting married at a wedding. And the players decided, instead of letting the princess get married, they wanted to kidnap the princess and save her from a terrible marriage that the princess didn't want to get into. And so they took the princess, they saved her, and they escaped. And now the entire campaign, all of that work Brendan Lee Mulligan put into the campaign, went up in flames, as now the entire kingdom is now chasing the players. And now the campaign shifted from where the princess was going to get like assassinated, and then it was going to be like a revenge story. The whole thing now shifted of being renegades and outlaws trying to save a princess from an oppressive king. There's no way you're going to really know what your players are going to engage with. So doing just the video game rendering technique that I talk about, just having general ideas of things and only rendering out what you have a very good chance of your players engaging with, that's the best way to make sure that your time as a dungeon master isn't wasted preparing a lot of stuff. And you'll also, that's just the bitter pill of being a dungeon master. You're gonna write a whole combat scenario. You're gonna create a really cool epic battle, and then your players are gonna get around it through stealth or any other ways they can. So they're adverse to combat, and so they're going to use stealth, or they're going to use a spell that you didn't really think about, and it's going to completely annihilate your combat encounter, and then it's going to feel like, wow, I did all this work, and it's very anticlimactic. That happens as dungeon masters. Make sure to let your players know that, wow, I was not expecting you to do that, but don't punish your players. If your players used a creative spell, if they are using stealth, if they're using game mechanics to interact with your world, I don't think that's something you should punish your players for. And instead, next time, you can more plan around it. If your players are engaging with stealth and they're using stealth to kind of like, they just roll a d20, they roll high, and now they get to sneak past a lot of the guards, maybe instead your time would be better focused on prepping interesting stealth mechanics and stealth gameplay, because your players are really engaging with stealth mechanics and they aren't really engaging with combat. They're trying to stay away from combat. Maybe give them rewards, maybe give them items that make it easier for them to stealth. Maybe you give them ways to assassinate people. Fatal Studios, I think it can be enjoyable sometimes when your players look for things you don't expect. I end up with shops and NPCs I would have never thought. Lots of pots and pans shops called Pots and Pans, and Pots and Pots and Pots. I love that. Yeah, I as a dungeon master, it is, as you get more used to it, creating characters on the fly sometimes become your players' favorite characters. Bob and the Goblin, or a pet or something. Actually, when your players push against the world and you generate something that's kind of silly, a little wacky, that shows to your players that, oh, there is more to this world and it kind of rewards them for exploring and engaging with your game. And it can sometimes be the most memorable moments of your game, and then your players are going to always have the inside joke of stores called Pots and Pots and Pots, and then every time they go to, they're going to be like, oh, is there a store called Pots and Pots and Pots? And then turns out you can turn that into a super underground ring of people who steal cutlery. Why? Because they're going to create an iron golem, you know? So you can take whatever they're engaging with and shape it into whatever monstrosity you want. But rewards your players when they do that kind of stuff. I think as a dungeon master, one of the best things we can do to encourage the things we want is to reward our players. I think it's a bad thing as a dungeon master to punish our players. So if our players are we'll get back to combat here. If our players are using stealth to get through most of the dungeon, okay? I don't like stealth because they just roll high on a dice and then it just kind of mitigated all the hard work and the stat blocks I created, okay? To punish my players, what I do is the second they roll low, I have all of the monsters that they bypassed then come in behind and flank them, and I just put them through an absolutely brutal combat. Well, you snuck past all of these guys, and since this is the consequences of your actions, because you didn't actually kill the guards, since you didn't play the game I wanted you, the way I wanted you to, I am now going to make this next combat session a gruel, a grind. I'm going to possibly kill some of your characters or majorly wound them or take them as prisoners because you didn't play the way I had prepped or expected you. I think that's actually a really bad thing that us dungeon masters fall into because your players are engaging in one way or another with your game, but they aren't matching what you had really prepped for or what you wanted to. So instead, let's reward our players when they do engage with the monsters. So let's say they roll really low. There's a combat encounter. After that combat encounter, they get a really cool magic item, like a necklace of fireballs, or give them something that's kind of broken, a temporary staff or spell scroll or something. Or a magic item that does this thing once a day for the next 2 weeks, but you have to use it once a day. Give them something to reward them when they do engage with the things they want. Then they'll be like, wait a minute, if we kill monsters, there's a chance we're going to get cool loot. You know, what if every monster in the dungeon has a piece of a crystal and your wizard is able to determine, dang, if we collect all 15 pieces of this crystal, we're going to get a really cool magic item. Well, okay, maybe we should go back and try to stealth and then stealth kill those guys, you know? So it's much better to reward your players than to punish your players for when they don't interact with the game they want. We reward them for interacting with what you do want. Positive feedback is way better than negative feedback. All right, it is 7:06. I appreciate you, Bernardo, Fatal Studios, Dungeon Studios, and we had some people here in the store watching. Thanks so much for everyone who watched. Like I said, we're going to do 2 of these in February, and then in March we're working on a really special one, how to publish, how to be a professional published dungeon master. So stay tuned for that. Great advice. Thank you for streaming this. Thank you, Fatal Studios, for joining in. We do have some previous lives on the channel if you want to see the other Dungeon Master workshops. This is, we want to support all the Dungeon Masters, so expect a lot more and cool stuff. All right, have a good night.